Texas Homeless Crisis 2026. How a silent drug epidemic is making homelessness worse and homeless in America, Texas, does not look like a state in crisis. From the outside, it looks like success. Big highways, big cities, big economy. Houston is one of the largest cities in the entire country. Dallas is a global business hub. Austin has become one of the most talked about tech centers in America. But underneath that image, something is quietly breaking. On any given night across Texas, tens of thousands of people are sleeping without a roof, under bridges, in tent camps along highways, in doorways, in parks where the summer heat does not stop even after the sun goes down. And behind this housing crisis, a second crisis is making everything dramatically worse. A growing drug epidemic has wrapped itself around Texas homelessness in a way that the official numbers do not fully capture. This is not a story about bad choices. This is a story about a system that ran out of capacity, a public health infrastructure that was never built for this volume, and a cycle so deeply rooted that breaking it requires far more than a shelter bed and good intentions. Welcome to Globe Path. Today, we are going inside the Texas homeless crisis of 2026. We are following the data, tracing the system failures, and asking the questions that government reports leave buried in the footnotes. Why are the streets getting worse while billions are being spent? Who is responsible for the gap between the money allocated and the people still sleeping outside tonight? And what would it actually take to turn this around? Stay with us until the end. This story is more layered than any headline can tell you. If this kind of investigative journalism matters to you, subscribe to Globe Path right now and hit the bell so you never miss an investigation. Chapter 1. The numbers behind the Texas crisis, before we talk about anything else we need to understand exactly what we are dealing with. Texas is the second largest state in America by both land and population. It has some of the fastest growing cities in the country, and it has a homelessness problem that has been quietly expanding for years while the skylines kept rising and the economy kept growing. Between 2021 and 2023, the homeless population in Texas increased by 21%. That is not a small statistical shift. That is a structural trend moving in the wrong direction across multiple years, despite significant money flowing into homeless response programs across the state. In Houston alone, the 2026 point-in-time count identified 3,321 people experiencing homelessness on a single February night. That number reflects relative stability compared to the previous year. But the point-in-time count is a snapshot of one night. The actual number of people who move through homelessness across a full year is significantly higher. Statewide, the Texas Homeless Data Sharing Network tracked over 61,000 unique individuals served by homeless response systems in a single recent year. And that figure is acknowledged to be an undercount because it does not include every region in the state. The racial dimension of this crisis is impossible to ignore. In Houston, Black and African American residents make up 21% of the general county population. They make up 56% of the population experiencing homelessness. That gap does not appear by accident. It is the product of decades of housing policy decisions and economic inequality that are still producing consequences on the streets today. What we are looking at in Texas is not a fringe problem affecting a small number of people in a forgotten corner of the state. It is a mainstream system failure operating at scale across the largest cities of one of the wealthiest states in America. Now pause and think about this for a moment. If the number of people sleeping outside in your city increased by 21% in just 2 years, and the system designed to respond was still trying to catch up. What would that mean for the person walking into that system for the very first time tonight? That question is not hypothetical in Texas. It is the daily reality that outreach workers face every single morning. Chapter 2, How a Drug Epidemic Made Everything Worse Now. We get to the part of this story that is hardest to explain without either overstating or understating what is actually happening. There is a drug epidemic running through the Texas homeless crisis. It is real. It is documented in the data, and it is making an already difficult situation dramatically harder to solve. But it is not the original cause of homelessness. Understanding that distinction is the key to understanding why the crisis is so resistant to simple solutions. Here is what the research actually shows. Between 25 and 50% of people experiencing homelessness in the United States have a substance use disorder. In the general housed population, that figure sits between 2 and 6%. That is a massive gap. But research consistently shows that the relationship between substance use and homelessness runs in both directions at the same time. Yes, addiction can contribute to losing housing, but losing housing also drives people towards substance use. When you are sleeping outside with no security, no privacy, and no relief from the physical and emotional weight of daily survival, the pull toward anything that numbs that pain becomes extremely powerful. Researchers call this situational substance use. People with no significant history of substance use before losing housing develop one after. The street itself creates the condition. In Texas specifically, the unintentional fatal drug overdose rate more than doubled between 2013 and 2023. It moved from 7.8 deaths per 1,000 people to 16.3 deaths per 1,000 people. That is a dramatic escalation across a full decade, affecting both the housed and unhoused population. The synthetic opioid crisis has been particularly devastating in Texas. In just 1 year, between 2019 and 2020, unintentional fatal overdoses involving synthetic opioids increased by 181% in this state. That trend continued rising through 2023. Travis County, which includes Austin, saw overdoses become the #1 cause of accidental death countywide. A public health emergency was declared there in 2022. For people already living outside, access to overdose prevention is inconsistent and unreliable. Naloxone, which can reverse an overdose, is not universally available across Texas homeless communities. Harm reduction programs exist, but are severely underfunded relative to the need they are trying to meet. Treatment programs have waiting lists that stretch for weeks. The opioid overdose rate for people experiencing homelessness is 6 times higher than for people in low-income housed situations. 6 times. That is not a number about personal failure. That is a number about what happens when a public health emergency meets a housing emergency at the same intersection with insufficient resources at that corner. The drug epidemic did not create the Texas homeless crisis, but it has made solving it exponentially harder, and the response to it has not come anywhere close to matching the scale of what the data demands. Chapter 3, Mental Health and the System That Was Never Built for This, alongside substance use disorders, mental health conditions represent one of the most persistent and least adequately addressed dimensions of what Texas homeless response workers deal with every single day. The numbers tell a sobering story. Mental health disorders affect a dramatically higher share of the unhoused population compared to the general housed population. And dual diagnosis, which means having both a mental health condition and a substance use disorder at the same time, accounts for 58 to 65% of people experiencing homelessness. More than half of the people sleeping outside in Texas cities tonight are dealing with both conditions simultaneously. That is not a counseling problem. That is a structural healthcare failure that has been building for decades. Dallas, Houston, and Austin have all been identified in research as among the worst cities in America for mental health access. The factors driving that ranking include the cost of care, the availability of qualified providers, and the overall accessibility of services for people at the lower end of the income scale. Mental health treatment in America is difficult to access even for people with stable housing and health insurance. For people without either, it becomes almost impossible to engage with consistently. And consistency is exactly what effective mental health treatment requires. Outreach workers in Texas describe encountering individuals in clear mental health crisis who cannot be connected to care because the available treatment beds are full and the waiting list is weeks long. And the person in crisis cannot hold on to a phone number or keep an appointment time when their immediate survival needs are not being met day to day. Here is the trap that swallows thousands of people every year. You cannot effectively treat a mental health condition without a stable living environment. And you cannot create a stable living environment without treating the mental health condition. This loop runs without interruption, and the current Texas system does not have enough resources at enough points in that loop to break it reliably for everyone who needs it. The behavioral health infrastructure in Texas was not built for this volume of need, and it has not been rebuilt or expanded to match what is actually happening on the ground right now in its largest cities. Now pause and ask yourself this. Could any person maintain consistent progress on a serious health condition if they had no reliable place to sleep, no consistent access to food, and no security from one day to the next? The answer is obvious, and yet that is the condition under which the system currently expects people to recover. Chapter 4, What the Response System Actually Looks Like. On the ground, Texas operates 12 continuum of care regions covering its major cities and surrounding areas. These systems coordinate emergency shelter transitional housing rapid rehousing programs and permanent supportive housing. They employ outreach workers, case managers, housing navigators, and program coordinators who show up every day and do difficult work under difficult conditions. The front end of the system works. Emergency shelter intake processes function. Outreach teams make contact. People are identified and registered. But the back end of the system, where people move from temporary emergency situations into permanent stable housing, is where the system strains and sometimes breaks. Outreach workers in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio begin their days before most of the city wakes up. They travel established routes through tent camps, along drainage corridors, and under highway overpasses. They carry water, food, and naloxone hygiene supplies, and the most important resource of all which is time and consistent human presence. Building real trust with someone living outside takes repetition. It takes showing up again and again without preconditions. It takes not making promises that the system cannot keep. An outreach worker might visit the same individual 15 times before that person is ready to take a step toward services. That is not failure. That is how trust works when someone has experienced repeated institutional disappointment. The challenge is that outreach teams across Texas are stretched beyond comfortable operating capacity. The ratio of outreach workers to unsheltered individuals means consistent high-frequency contact with everyone who needs it is not always achievable. Workers carry heavy caseloads and manage the emotional weight of a job where people they know sometimes die between visits. Staff burnout and turnover create gaps in the continuity of care. And continuity is precisely what the people being served need most desperately. Permanent supportive housing, which pairs long-term stable housing with ongoing voluntary case management and health services, is the model with the strongest evidence for keeping people housed over time. Houston has invested in this model and has been recognized nationally for measurable progress in reducing chronic homelessness over the past decade. That progress came from sustained commitment over years, not from a single program or a single budget cycle. The lesson from what is working in Texas is consistent. Low barrier access combined with permanent housing and voluntary wraparound services produces the strongest long-term outcomes. What works is not complicated. What is complicated is generating the political will and the sustained funding to do it at the scale that the crisis actually demands. Outro, thank you for watching this documentary all the way through. The Texas homeless crisis is not a simple story, and it does not have a simple solution. It is a layered intersection of housing policy failures, economic pressure, a public health system under strain, and tens of thousands of individual human lives that deserve far more than a policy footnote. At GlobePath, we follow the money. We trace the systems. We ask who made the decisions that produce these outcomes and what different decisions would actually look like. Because this crisis has causes, it has a paper trail, and it has solutions that are documented and ready to be funded. The gap between knowing what works and doing it at scale is a political gap, and closing political gaps requires sustained public attention. If this documentary gave you something real to think about, please like this video and subscribe to GlobePath. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of the Texas crisis surprised you the most. What do you think needs to change first? We read every single comment. GlobePath. Follow the money, follow the truth.